So that was Commander Crabb, and it's a pretty interesting one. For those of you who have had the bonus episodes on our Patreon, you'll know that I'm pretty obsessed. Well, not really obsessed, but I'm pretty into a good Cold War espionage story, and I really love the old spy stuff, which sort of turned me on to this one. But I've actually only heard of it very recently when I was chatting with my dad. He came over for a coffee and we were talking, and he'd read about this in a book, and he sort of said to me, you should have a look at this for your podcast. And I looked it up, and immediately I was like, yep, okay, Cold War espionage, I'm well in there. But it was brilliant and interesting story. One of the things that I thought was quite shocking about it, or not really shocking, but surprised me, was how candid the politicians in the transcript, how they spoke about spies and spying, and how, it was just basically expected. Like, of course, they're not stupid and they know what's going on, but it's always one of those things, like an unspoken thing rather than actually voiced. I suppose because this session was, being stashed away for years, that they could speak like that, but they spoke so openly about how, basically everyone spied on each other, and that was fine. We have a secret service, Russia has a secret service, we all know. I thought that was quite interesting, and how, the original Moscow note to England saying that they are upset, like essentially they weren't really upset, it was just propaganda. It wasn't, they didn't really care. That most of the politicians agreed that Russia, this really wouldn't have mattered to Russia if they'd have discovered Crabb under the boat and killed him or whatever they did with him. They didn't really care, that was not really the issue. It was all a big game, like, oh, we found your spy, so we're going to sort of release a story to the press about it to sort of aid in our propaganda, which, I found that quite interesting, how it was just so candidly spoken about. But the original documents that came from, I'll post them on the website, and you should definitely check them out, because although it sounds quite dry that they're this sort of transcript of a parliamentary debate, it sounds obviously really dry and dull, but given the age and the subject matter, it's definitely interesting, and I recommend reading it. It is about 100 pages, the entire file, but that's not everything. The parliamentary debate's probably only about 20 or 30 of those pages, and it's definitely worth a read. So I'll post them on the website, on the links in the show notes, and it's definitely worth checking out. And one other thing, just before we sort of get into the meat and veg of it, but one other sort of thing that I thought was strange was, or not strange, just insane, was how when Commander Crabb and Sidney Knowles started up the Underwater Workers' Party, they didn't actually have any equipment really, and they were just diving, swimming breaststroke with plimsolls on, and like a thin frogman suit and almost no breathing apparatus, and then just pulling mines off the side of boats. That is insane. Who volunteers for that job? I posted in the week a little sort of hint to the episode, and it was a Tintin, because obviously he was drawn in Tintin apparently, and just the speech bubble of him just saying, what a job. And you think, yeah, right, what a job. Who would have done that? It was madness. So he got recognised for his bravery in the end, but you wouldn't catch me under that water, I'll tell you that for nothing. So let's get into the more suspicious side of things. I think the whole thing was incredibly suspicious. It's very easy to say it was perhaps just a big bungle and the government were just trying to cover up sort of mistakes on their part. But I think there's much more to it than that. One of the most sort of suspicious things, just to get it out of the way, that actually turns out it wasn't suspicious at all, is that the second guy who checked into the hotel, his name was actually Smith, which is ridiculous because it sounds like a joke. Like, it's almost wants to make you facepalm when you read it. Like, oh, the secret agent who signed into the hotel under the name of Mr. Smith. But in fact, that wasn't just his name. Which then makes me think, well, if you are a secret agent, your name is Smith, surely you'd just be using a fake name, right? Or maybe it's a double bluff. I don't know. But I thought that was quite funny because at first I was like, I sort of researched, okay, so who is this Mr. Smith? Who was he, thinking it was obviously a nom de plume or whatever, but it was actually his real name. So that was funny. But who was the police officer? The government, at one point in some of their notes, they tried to palm off how he took the notes from the register, the hotel register, and they tried to sort of palm it off as, oh, well, he did that off his own back and it had nothing to do with us. But I can't see that. If he's just a police officer, seems like a very bold thing to do for someone who's not that high up, surely just a regular police officer just wouldn't make that decision, I'm going to go in there and sort of take the law into my own hands and just rip out these pages. I don't see that. I mean, there's an awful lot of suspicious things, but his mum and his, best war buddy, Sidney Knowles, they didn't just say they couldn't identify his body. Both of them straight up refused to ID him. His wife, or his ex-wife rather, and his current fiance, they both sort of said they couldn't identify him. There wasn't, enough to go on. And when you read some of the descriptions of when they found him from the RAF men, his body does sound, they give some pretty graphic descriptions, and it sounds like up to 14 months in the water, it just doesn't sound like it was in a great way. So I can understand if they said, they couldn't identify him, which say his ex-wife and his fiance said. But his mother and Sidney, who you would have thought both knew him very well, they straight up refused to ID him. And his mother doesn't really go into it. She just refused to ID him and didn't believe that it was his body that was buried, which, leads me on to the next thing. What was the £100 paid to her by the Admiralty? Was that a normal thing back in the day? Or, some sort of insurance money? Or was it hush money or what? I don't know. But that was strange. I only found a couple of sources that mentioned it. They were both good sources, but they didn't dig into it at all. It was just sort of mentioned almost on the side. But anyway, getting back to the body and the identification, Sidney wouldn't ID it because of the scars. One of the scars he got when he was diving and was the wash of a passing boat pushed him into some barbed wire and cut his knee. Now that would have given him a pretty big scar. And the one on his thigh was from, I saw two sources on this, and one said he was shot and it was a bullet wound, but the second source, which sounded more like it fitted his life, was that it was stabbed underwater whilst he was in Gibraltar. And that makes more sense to me. But either way, he had these two scars, and they both sound, even if he was shot rather than stabbed, either way, that's a pretty big scar that's going to leave. And the same with the one on the back of his left knee, where, if you're pushed up against some barbed wire, that's going to leave a pretty big scar as well, and quite an unusual scar. So it seems really fishy, which sort of leads into the inquiry, which was also really fishy, but with the pathologist not being able to find a scar. And then once the inquiry was adjourned, suddenly he found a scar. It sounds a bit strange. And the whole kind of way they came to agreeing that, we can identify this as Crabb, didn't even sound convincing, really. The chain of coincidences, that's not very, it's all a bit, I'm not sure I'm down with that too much. And obviously I read a lot of the government notes, which again, I'll put them on the, on my website, but a lot of the back and forth about not getting them to ask embarrassing questions and not calling certain Admiralty workers to the stand for the inquiry, it all sounds very, it's just the government putting their sort of fingers right in there and messing with it. It was very messed around, that inquiry. And, whether or not it was just a big bungle and they were just afraid of it being embarrassed, but if that's the case, it all seems a bit over the top, really. It's very reactionary. And it's the same. It's the same with the BBC documentary. That was very reactionary. You know, either there's something much more suspicious here, or the government were really not doing themselves any favours by being hugely overreactionary and over the top. But I mean, messing with the BBC documentary, that again was really over the top and way out of whack if there's nothing suspicious here. Because I think what they were really doing there was stifling the press, stifling the media. And not only that, they stifled the media, which is, not great, but I'm sure they've done it sometimes. But you would think the things they've done it for are pretty big deals. Whereas this, it seems like, if nothing big happened here or suspicious happened here, it was well over the top. They also, they refused to cooperate because essentially Darlow, the producer, he contacted them and said, look, my sources are slightly concerned about having their Navy pensions stopped or, basically just repercussions from appearing on the show. And that was all he was really contacting them for. He didn't want any help from them or anything else. He was just sort of saying, can you offer some reassurance that they can appear on this documentary and it'll all be okay? And in fact, the documentary even favoured their side of the story for large parts of it, but they still didn't want it made. And suddenly, his sources didn't want to talk. And then he came back and said, because he kind of pressed on with it and was like, nah, I'm still going to do it. Screw you. Despite the fact that, they wanted to okay the script and all this, and they were back and forth in behind his back about going up to higher ups in the BBC to basically crush the project. Eventually he sort of came back and said, look, I've got a new source now and he's got this information and, basically, is he going to be okay to say this? And he didn't give them the source's name, but they tracked him down. They used the security services to track him down and dissuade him. I mean, and obviously it's spoken of how they dissuaded him, but you can imagine, right? Like, really suspicious. So yeah, they were all pretty suspicious things that were going on. One of the sort of stranger elements, where you start getting into kind of conspiracy territory, really, is if his landlady was telling the truth about him telling her that he was leaving his house, then that was either a massive coincidence or, again, that was pretty suspicious. But see, there was three people that kind of said things which kind of lean it in towards conspiracy, really, and I think the landlady's one of them. Because you don't know if what she's saying is true or not. And then Pat Rose was the second one, who was his fiancée when he disappeared. I'm not sure I'm into her story too much. Sounds a little bit like a sort of fluff piece to some extent, like, oh, enough time's passed, we can sort of make a story out of this that people will be interested in reading, and we'll give you a bit of money if you collaborate. Either that, or she's not that well because she was seeing people on the train giving her information. But all the stuff she said sounded a little bit corny and a little bit kind of spy movie, didn't it? Like, oh, there was sort of people sitting next to me suddenly on the train passing me messages from Moscow. It was all a bit, yeah, okay, I'm not sure I believe that. And then what is weird as well is that both Pat Rose and Sydney Knowles both came out many years after the event, and they both gave totally different stories, and they both knew him very, very well. So who are you going to believe? Pat Rose, I can imagine to a certain degree, so the way they spoke, it was a bit of a fluff piece maybe. I mean, I don't know, I'm judging, but it sounds like that doesn't sound implausible to me. Whereas Sydney Knowles was taking part when he gave the information that he had. That was a bit less, he wasn't selling a story there. He just told a journalist about it. I'm not sure I believed his story though. That's the thing, is because, he said some things which seemed a bit out there, like out of left field all of a sudden. Although the interesting thing with both Pat Rose and Sydney Knowles was that they both sort of mentioned, either alluded to the idea or in the case of Pat Rose, straight up said it, that he was in Russia now. So did he actually defect or not? It could have well been possible. And according to Sidney Knowles, like if you believe anything that he says, he actually said that Crabb was hanging out with pro-Soviet people in the year or so sort of running up to his disappearance. So if you believe any of his story, and that, in his story, he was the one that dropped him in it with the MI5 and told them, I'm a little bit worried about him. He's, hanging out with the wrong sorts and he's getting sort of funny ideas about sort of Soviet Russia. So, if you believe that, then he may well have defected, This doesn't seem too outlandish, really. I saw one source that said it was a historian, essentially, he said that he thought that it was unlikely for him to defect because he was too patriotic and too much pride in his British war history, basically, in his part in the war to defect. So he thinks he was too patriotic, but who knows, opinions change as you get older and you never know. As for the guy who stabbed him, or the Russian guy who said he stabbed him under the water, I don't believe him for a second. That's nonsense. I mean, why he said he caught him placing a mine. Now, you could say, okay, perhaps he wasn't placing a mine and he's not lying either. That's what he thought he was doing when actually he was just inspecting the hole, maybe. But, he said that he's caught him placing a mine. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, if in the greater context, it makes zero sense for him to have been placing a mine. He wasn't trying to blow up the ship. No one was. Like I said, they were trying to repair relations, not damage them. So they certainly weren't going to blow up the ship whilst it is moored in Portsmouth. I mean, that's ridiculous. But maybe he just got it wrong and he didn't think he was placing a mine. However, it turns out that when people looked into this guy's backstory, they think that he was probably likely that he was a bus driver at the time rather than a Red Navy officer. So that sort of sums up that one, doesn't it? He probably bought that medal and just had a knife laying around, and the documentary thought, yeah, why not? It's a good story. Stick him in. I think that's probably about, I think he's got zero credibility. I think the sniper story is not too far out there. Like perhaps he was shot in the head. If he popped up by the boat and someone just thought, hello, suspect, bang, could have. At least it's more likely than the bus driver stabbing him under the water, who sounds like he wants to be a hero. But if that's true, then why wasn't his body taken back to Russia and used for propaganda? Because the British government, they seem to think that that was the most likely outcome of it all if the Russians had killed him. And that was something they were quite concerned about, was the Russians using his body for propaganda purposes. So if it were true that they did shoot him, then why didn't they take him away? Seems weird that they would just shoot him and let him float around in the water. Because, surely they'd want to take him away anyway. Even if it wasn't for propaganda, they wouldn't just leave him floating in the water, you would think. I don't think the last sort of one to sort of talk about really is, did he just die in a sort of normal way? Or, a more normal way in that, was he just unfit, or did he have a malfunction with his equipment? And I think that's a pretty easy one to answer. I think it's not because it's boring, but I just think he had way too much experience. I think he was much too experienced, and he hadn't actually been retired that long. He hadn't, he was only 46. He wasn't ancient. He was, 46, it's knocking on. But he wasn't ancient, and he only had to swim 80 yards under the water because they dropped him off in the water 80 yards from the boat. So it's not like he had to swim a few hundred miles to get there. He just swam across the harbour essentially. So he wasn't that unfit that you couldn't do that after that much experience, in my opinion. And he'd only been retired a very short time between working in the furniture industry and being employed for. And I don't think this job by the MI6. So no, I don't think he died in a. I don't think it was something as innocuous as that. I think it was definitely more suspicious. But what did happen? I don't know. I haven't got a clue. And I don't think I've really got an opinion. I think possibly he may have defected. I don't think that's that out there, really. But then whose body was it that washed up? Was that his body or not? And that's just another one. I don't know. It sounds all very suspicious. His feet don't seem to have matched the profile of his feet, because his wife and ex-wife rather, and fiance at the time both sort of mentioned that he had quite unusual feet. Along with that, and the lack of scars and such, it all just seems. And there was a lot of comments about the body's height as well, but I'm not sure how they could really tell that so well. And it wasn't just his head that he was missing; he was actually missing, the upper part of his torso as well. So, I mean, I know you could work that out by using proportions of the rest of his body and a proportion, putting in proportion the size of how big his head would have been, and you could work that height out. But still, I think that was a job for the coroner and the pathologist. It wouldn't have been a job, the people identifying him wouldn't have done all that. So I don't know if it really was his body. I think that's very suspicious. So what was going on? I don't know. As usual, Dark Histories, where we don't solve any of the mysteries that we look into, basically. And to be honest, I'm quite happy with that. I'd rather just sort of keep it as a mystery and go, it wasn't that suspicious. And it definitely was suspicious, in my opinion. That's about all I'm 100% on, was that this wasn't nothing. I think it was definitely something. And I think the government knew a lot about it. And I suppose in 40 years, when the documents come out, if they ever do, we might find out then. But I definitely think there was something suspect here, because the government were way, way over the top if there was nothing. And I don't think that's true. So, yeah, that's Buster Crabb, who was awesome and was in Tintin. His life was great. If you enjoyed it, let me know. You can contact us on social media. I've got Twitter at Dark Histories. We're on Instagram, which is dark_histories. And we're on Facebook at facebook.com/Dark Histories. We've got a Discord channel actually now, and that's really been quite fun. I got to admit, over the last couple of weeks, I haven't been very active because I've been really busy trying to sort things out with the show. Obviously, I'm still been very active soloing it, so I've been trying to arrange a new co-host as well as kind of make the show and everything else that goes along with it, and run a real life. So, I haven't been very active on the Discord, but usually I am. Normally, if I'm by my computer, I'm on there, and we've got quite a nice little community. Everyone's sort of like-minded and seems to get on and talk, enjoy talking pretty diverse subjects. I mean, we've gone from sort of UFO cattle mutilations to sort of all sorts of different sort of true crimey sort of conversations. And sometimes people just talk about, our lives and, places we live, because we all live in pretty different places. So it's been a really nice place. So yeah, if you fancy hopping onto the Discord, have a chat with me, have a chat with some of the other people, then get on there. So on our website, if you go to darkissues.com and then click on the contact link, you'll find a link to our Discord. So I'd love to build a little community. And if we can, come build a community with us. It's good fun. Once again, I say congratulations to Slow Quan for winning the shirt. And if you do want to buy a t-shirt, we don't get much money for them, to be honest. But if you would want to buy one, we got t-shirts and hoodies and stuff, and they're kind of cool. I didn't want to make a t-shirt for a podcast that was just sort of Dark Histories podcast splattered all over the front. So I tried to make them a little bit more interesting. And we got a Dyatlov and a man kind of nod to our old episodes there. So check them out, and they're kind of cool. Again, you can find that at darkhistories.com and click on the merch link. Other than that, if you like to support us, we've got Audible affiliate link, which is audibletrial.com/darkhistories. Or again, if you go to our website at darkhistories.com, you can hit the support link and you'll find a link to it there. And that, that helps us, as well as the Patreon, which really helps us. The Patreons, the people that keep this whole thing running really at this point, especially now I'm back to doing it solo. Before we sort of split the costs between the hosts, and now, we had our Patreon, which was sort of covering everything. But that was nice because at the end of the day, if, that stopped covering everything, I wasn't sort of left by myself to cover everything. But again, I am now. So, if you can support, that would be really helpful. Obviously, not everyone wants to support and not everyone can afford to support, and that's totally fine. If you can't, just share it around with your friends. Social media, I'm really bad at social media. So any sort of sharing of the show, that really helps me out because I'm dreadful at social media and sort of self-promotion. So, that's another way you can support us. But, if you do fancy sort of jumping on the Patreon, you get bonus episodes, early access to all my show notes, things like that. There's like a Patreon-only channel on the Discord. Yeah, it's like, if you can support, that'd be great. And say, I put quite a bit of effort into making the shows in terms of sort of time-wise, considerable amount of effort, in fact. So, if you fancy chucking $1 my way to say thanks, then I wouldn't turn it away, because every little helps, and it helps me make a show that, the best show that I can. And it also alleviates my stress of worrying how long I could make the show for. So yeah, anyway, enough about all that. I don't really like selling stuff. Anyone that's listened to the show long enough knows that I hate all this stuff. So yeah, it's just, but you've got to say it, haven't you? 'Cause you don't ask, don't get. So yeah, that's that for this week. Thanks for listening. It's really great to have you all, as always. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you very soon. Cheers. Sleep tight.